I think when we think about ancient religious texts, we often carry this like massive expectation of grand, sweeping cosmic
Oh,
concepts.
for sure.
Like we expect angels with flaming swords or, massive spiritual battles in the heavens.
Right. Pillars of fire lighting up the desert, roaring seas parting to make a dry path, that kind of thing.
Spot on. We have this idea that ancient faith was always lived at the absolute maximum volume, dealing with realities that were completely disconnected from the ordinary world.
Yeah, we really do tend to separate the spiritual from the physical in our modern minds. It's a very common modern assumption.
It really is.
I mean, we sit in, air-conditioned rooms. We're completely removed from the production of our own food. And so we read these ancient texts through the lens of a highly sanitized technological society.
Yeah, we just go to the grocery store. We don't see the dirt.
Right. Well, but when you look closely at the language of the ancient Near East, you quickly realize that their highest theological realities were inextricably tied to the dirt.
Like literally tied to the ground.
Yeah, their understanding of the divine was tied to farming, to seasonal rain, to physical sweat, and to the very mundane daily grind of survival. The biblical authors lived in an agrarian society, and so their linguistic landscape is surprisingly practical. It's grounded in the realities of the soil.
Welcome to Reform Thinking. We are so glad you're joining us today for this deep dive.
Yes, thanks for being here with us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to take a magnifying glass to a single, highly specific ancient Hebrew concept.
Just one word.
Just one word. And we have a massive stack of linguistic resources, heavy-duty lexicons, grammatical manuals, and historical commentaries sitting on the table today.
Heavy being the operative word.
These books are huge.
Seriously, they weigh a ton.
Yeah.
But instead of reading them like a dry bibliography, we are going to synthesize all this scholarship to show you how one tiny, seemingly insignificant word unlocks a massive theological reality.
Yeah, and every single one of these academic sources is laser-focused on this one subject. We're looking at the ancient Hebrew word mosh, which translates into English as chaff.
Right, chaff. And I know it might seem like a minor, almost trivial detail to spend an entire discussion on an agricultural byproduct.
I mean, it sounds a little dry at first glance.
It does, yeah. But studying this specific, seemingly insignificant part of the ancient farming process is actually the key to grasping much larger biblical themes.
Themes regarding, like, divine justice, human transience, and the nature of reality itself.
You got it. In an agrarian society, the most common, everyday objects become the most potent vehicles for communicating truth.
Yeah, true. We are not just doing a dry dictionary reading here. We are investigating how the harsh, physical realities of ancient agriculture shaped timeless poetry and theology.
So we need to start with the literal physical reality of moo.
Right, because before we can understand the metaphor, we have to understand the thing itself. Like, what is this object in the real world?
Well, according to our lexicographical sources, specifically looking at Brown Driver Briggs and Strong's Concordance, it is defined precisely as the worthless husk material that surrounds the ripe seed of a plant.
The worthless husk. Okay.
Yeah. Linguistically, it is classified in the dictionaries as a masculine noun, but the physical description is what matters most for our understanding here.
Let's get into that physical description.
So the lexicons make a point to specify its physical properties in stark terms. It is the non-fruit part of a grain plant.
Meaning the part you don't eat.
Right. This includes the various seed coverings, the glooms and the husks that protect the kernel while it grows.
Okay.
But the absolute key defining physical trait, the characteristic that gives the word its entire metaphorical weight in the biblical text, is its complete lack of mass.
It's just incredibly light.
It is very light, and because it is so incredibly light, it is highly susceptible to being blown away in the slightest breeze.
To make this concept concrete for you listening right now, think about roasting peanuts.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right, because you crack open the thick, hard outer shell, and inside there is the peanut itself, the seed.
Yeah.
But covering that seed, clinging tightly to it, is a paper-thin, dark red skin.
Everyone knows that annoying little skin.
Yeah, and when you rub the roasted peanut between your fingers, that red skin just flakes off. If you even breathe heavily on your hands, those red flakes instantly catch the air and blow away across the table.
They just scatter everywhere.
Yeah, and that skin offers zero nourishment. Like, you would never make a meal out of it.
No, you'd choke on it.
Right. The substantial, nourishing, valuable part is the solid nut inside. That papery red skin is essentially a modern, everyday picture of chaff. It is the wrapper that has outlived its usefulness.
That's a really helpful way to visualize it. And our sources also mention related agricultural entities that we need to distinguish from chaff.
Right, the lexicons are very careful to distinguish between different parts of the plant.
They are. Specifically, they differentiate chaff from seed, obviously, but also from straw, which is
Yeah.
the Hebrew word tibin, and stubble, which is the word qua.
So let me push back a bit on this, or at least ask for some clarification. Why is the careful distinction between the husk, the straw, the stubble, and the seed so utterly vital for an ancient agrarian society to understand and name? Like, why do they need so many words for dead plant stuff?
Well, what's fascinating here is how these distinctions are a matter of absolute survival.
Survival, really?
Absolutely. In an ancient agrarian economy, the separation of move from the grain is not just a preference for texture, like us wanting a smoother peanut. It is the difference between life and death.
Wow. Okay, break that down.
So the seed, the grain itself, is the caloric center of the society. It is the bread, the sustenance, its life.
Right.
Then you have the straw, or tibin, which is the stalk of the plant. Now, straw has actual economic utility.
You can use it for things.
Yeah, you can use straw to feed livestock. You can use it for animal bedding, or, as we see famously in the historical account of the Exodus in Egypt, you can mix it into mud to give structural integrity to bricks.
Oh, right. Making bricks without straw, I remember that.
Right. And then stubble, or quash, is the root system, and the few inches of stalk left in the ground after the harvest.
So what do they do with that?
It also has utility. You can let sheep graze on it, or you can burn it to return nutrients to the soil for the next planting season.
Okay, so seed is food, straw is building material and feed, stubble is fertilizer.
Yes, but muth, the chaff, is completely worthless. It cannot be eaten, it cannot be baked into bread, it provides zero caloric value, it cannot be used for building, and animals will not touch it.
It has zero utility.
Zero. Furthermore, if you do not remove it, it actively ruins the flour and makes the bread inedible. It must be separated and discarded through the rigorous physical processes of threshing and winnowing.
That makes the reality of the ancient harvest so much clearer. You have to isolate the life-giving seed from this worthless, weightless husk.
You have to.
Now let's look at the etymology and the cross-cultural linguistics to see how ancient people codified this physical necessity into language. Because it's not just a Hebrew concept, right?
No, not at all. The scholars and linguists have tracked this concept across different ancient languages, and they trace its origin to a specific root word.
So looking at our numbers here, it's Strong's 4671, TWOT 1162A, and GK 5161.
Right, and they trace it back to a root, 4160, that carries the meaning pressed out, winnowed, or threshed loose.
Winnowed or threshed loose? That makes sense.
Yeah, and the sources provide several cognates, which are essentially linguistic cousins, from other ancient Near Eastern languages.
Like what?
Well, we see later Mishnaic Hebrew using the exact same word, mu. We see Arabic using the word man to describe straw or stalk material.
Okay.
And we see various Talmudic Aramaic or Chaldean variants, like mus, marco, musa, and mata.
So let's stop and ask a functional question here. I can hear the listener thinking this right now. Why should a modern reader care at all about Arabic cognates or ancient Aramaic Targum translations when we are just trying to understand one Hebrew word?
Yeah, it sounds like pure academic trivia.
It really does.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, these cognates prove the deep historical continuity of the concept. The physical act of threshing grain transcends all language barriers and political borders in the ancient Near East.
Because everyone has to eat.
Spot on. Whether you were an Israelite, an Egyptian, an Assyrian, or a Babylonian, you grew grain. Your entire society depended on separating the heavy seed from the weightless husk.
So they all needed a word for it.
Right. Because that harsh physical necessity was universal across the entire Fertile Crescent, it left a clear, undeniable linguistic footprint across the entire region.
That's pretty cool.
The shared sounds, that specific M and S or Z consonant combination, show us that this concept was universally recognized and vocalized in a very similar way long before the biblical text was entirely finalized.
It was the shared vocabulary of human survival.
That's a great way to put it. When a word exists across that many ancient dialects, it tells us that the reality it describes was inescapable for the people living in that era.
I love that, the shared vocabulary of survival. So Left Nero are focused from those broad regional languages across the Middle East down to the precise specific spelling within biblical Hebrew itself.
Okay, let's do it.
This brings us to the topic of orthography. which is just a technical term for how a word is spelled, and the very real historical reality of scribe confusion.
Yes, this is where it gets highly technical, but incredibly revealing.
Right, because our lexicons note some fascinating spelling variations for the word mo. Most often, the word is spelled in what scholars call a defective manner.
Which sounds like a bad thing, but it's just a grammatical term.
Yeah, to translate that grammatical jargon into plain English, it means the ancient Hebrews wrote it using only consonants without a vowel letter to help sound it out.
Right, just the raw consonants.
It is spelled with just two Hebrew letters, mem and sod. Imagine you are texting a friend quickly and you type BLDNG instead of building.
Right, you drop the vowels to save time.
Yeah, you leave out the vowels, but your friend knows what you mean. That is essentially what defective spelling is. But the lexicons note that it does appear once in what is called a plene, or full form, with the Hebrew letter vav inserted in the middle to act as an O vowel sound.
Yes, and that specific full spelling happens in the book of Zephaniah, chapter 2, verse 2.
So why the variation?
Well, these spelling variations are very common in ancient Hebrew texts as the language slowly transitioned over centuries in how it visually represented vowel sounds. But the dictionaries and lexicons give us an extensive, serious warning right at this point.
A warning. About what?
They explicitly list several similar-looking Hebrew words and caution the reader to be extremely careful to distinguish them from Lu.
Because they look identical on the page.
Basically, yeah. Because the original text was often written with only two consonants, it was highly vulnerable to being confused with words that shared those same consonants but derived from completely different root ideas.
It really is a dizzying list of look-alike words when you open up the lexicon.
It's a minefield.
Yeah. The lexicons warn us about the words mukah and mukalla, which stem from the Hebrew root meaning to go out or to exit.
Right.
Then we have the words mukah and mukwet, which stem from the roots yak and huk, relating to the action of pouring out, like pouring liquid metal or oil.
Okay.
And then there is the word mu, which comes from a completely different root meaning too fine.
Yeah, you can see how easily a scribe could get tripped up.
I want you to imagine the physical reality of an ancient scribe for a second.
Oh, man.
You are sitting in a dimly lit room, maybe working by the flickering light of an oil lamp or a candle. You have a massive animal skin scroll rolled out in front of you.
No reading glasses, no perfect overhead lighting.
Nothing. You are dipping a reed pen into homemade ink, copying a text letter by letter, hour after hour. Your eyes are tired. How incredibly easy would it be to make a tiny slip of the pen, add a small hook to a letter, and accidentally confuse a word for chaff with a word derived from to pour out or to go out?
It would be incredibly easy. And that fatigue is exactly why the rules for copying the Hebrew scriptures eventually became so mathematically rigorous.
They started counting the letters, right?
Yes. Scribes had to count letters and find the exact middle of a scroll to ensure they had not missed or added a single character. This highlights the painstaking nature of biblical translation and textual preservation.
Because the stakes were so high?
Huge stakes. Because of the defective spelling, where the helpful vowel markers were entirely absent, scribes and later readers had to rely heavily on the surrounding context. Context always dictates meaning.
Right.
Understanding the linguistic root structure, knowing whether a specific word in a sentence is functioning as a derivative of a three-letter root meaning to pour or a two-letter root meaning chaff, is what keeps the transmission of the text accurate.
So the lexicographers include these warnings in our reference books today to keep us from making those same errors.
Right, because a single misunderstood or mistranslated letter doesn't just change a word. It completely shatters the theological point of an entire verse.
Give me an example of how that would look.
Well, if you translate a verse to say, "The wicked are driven away like a pouring out," you have lost the entire poetic image that the author intended. The metaphor collapses.
Wow. Yeah, that level of required attention to detail is staggering. Speaking of the heavy burden of translation, let's shift chronologically forward in history.
Okay, moving forward.
How did later scholars, specifically Greek-speaking scholars, attempt to translate this highly specific, culturally ingrained Hebrew agricultural concept into their own language?
This is a really great historical pivot.
Yeah, it brings us to the Septuagint's Greek dilemma. And for those listening who might not be familiar, the Septuagint is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament.
Right, often abbreviated as LXX.
Yes, the LXX. It was created in Alexandria, Egypt, a couple of centuries before the time of Christ, for a Jewish population that spoke Greek rather than Hebrew.
And when those 70 Greek translators encountered the Hebrew word "ma," they faced a significant linguistic challenge.
Because Greek and Hebrew don't map perfectly onto each other.
Right. Our sources note that instead of finding one perfect Greek equivalent, the text provides 4 distinct Greek words that they employed across different verses.
4 different words for one Hebrew word.
Yes. They use the Greek word knus 5 times. They use the word anthos 1 time. They use the word akaron 1 time. And they use the word koniortos 1 time.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Look at those words. Tanus, anthos, akaron, koniortos. Why did these brilliant Greek translators need 4 completely different words to express one single Hebrew idea?
It seems messy, doesn't it?
It does. Did they just not know what mu actually meant, or were they being sloppy?
This raises an important question about the philosophy of translation itself. It looks inconsistent on the surface, but it's actually a brilliant demonstration of catching the nuance of a text.
Okay, how so?
Well, instead of doing a simple, rigid, one-to-one word swap, which often results in clunky, lifeless sentences, the Greek translators realized they had to capture the behavior of the chaff in varying poetic contexts.
The behavior, not just the object itself.
Right. They understood that the Hebrew authors were not just talking about a static noun sitting on the ground. They were always describing a dynamic physical action. So, the translators adjusted their vocabulary based on the specific action in the verse.
That makes a lot of sense. So what do those specific Greek words actually mean?
Let's break them down. The word knus often refers to fine dust, powder, or the light down of a bird.
So extremely light and airy.
Yes. The word anthos usually translates to a flower or a blossom, likely capturing the specific image of light pollen or a dry petal being carried on the wind.
Beautiful, but fragile.
Exactly. Right. The word akaron is the more standard literal Greek word for chaff or stalk material. And the word koniortos specifically means dust that has been intentionally raised or kicked up by the wind.
Oh, wow. So they were really paying attention to the wind.
They had to. The translators had to use this wide variety of Greek terms because they were trying to capture the precise nuance of the Hebrew poetry, which, as we are about to see, always focuses on the interaction between the husks and the wind.
The dynamic action of the wind. That observation perfectly bridges into the strict grammatical rule that governs every single appearance of the word new in the Hebrew Bible.
Yes, let's look at the grammar of the metaphor itself.
We are moving from the dictionary definition to the actual grammatical usage, and the rules here are incredibly rigid.
They are absolute. The lexicons provide a core lexical rule for this word that is absolutely unyielding across the entire biblical text.
What's the rule?
Mu is always, without exception, used in the context of being driven, scattered, or blown by the wind. That is, its defined inherent action. You do not find it simply existing in a pile. Its very nature in the text is motion.
Motion and wind.
Yes.
And the second core rule is just as strict. It is always used in a simile. In the original Hebrew, it is always accompanied by the preposition k, which is a single letter attached to the front of the word that translates to like or as.
Always a simile, never literal.
Yeah. The text notes its occurrences in what grammarians call the absolute state, which just means the word stands alone, as in Hosea chapter 13, verse 3 and 6 other times.
Right.
And it notes its appearance in the construct state, which means it is grammatically glued to the next word, meaning the chaff of something, as we see in Isaiah chapter 17, verse 13.
Chaff the mountains, for instance.
Yes, but the fact that it is always preceded by like or as is incredibly striking to me. Think about this. The Hebrew Bible is full of literal farming rules.
Pages and pages of them.
Right. It tells you when to plant, when to harvest, how to treat your ox, and what to do with the corners of your field. But it never once talks about literal chaff sitting on a literal threshing floor.
It never gives practical farming advice on how to sweep up manure.
No. It is exclusively, 100% of the time, used as a poetic device. So what makes this specific physical object so perfectly suited for simile that the biblical writers refuse to ever use it in a literal sense?
Well, the physical object was so universally recognized and deeply understood by the ancient audience that the writers utilized it purely as a vehicle for weighty, massive theological truths.
They didn't have to explain it.
No, they didn't need to explain the farming practice because everyone already knew it. Everyone listening to the prophets knew what chaff was. Everyone knew what happened when the farmer tossed the crushed grain into the air with a winnowing fork and the evening wind hit the threshing floor.
The heavy grain falls, the husk blows away.
Right. The heavy grain fell straight down to the earth, and the useless husks were violently carried away into the air. Therefore, it becomes the ultimate, perfect illustration for transience, emptiness, and lack of substance.
It's visceral.
It requires no further explanation.
Ugh.
When a prophet stands up and says something is like chaff, the listener's brain instantly visualizes weightlessness, absolute worthlessness, and sudden, irreversible removal. It is the most efficient metaphor available to them.
That brings us directly to the specific targets of this metaphor. Who or what is being compared to these empty husks? Let's look at the first target the authors aim this word at, the fate of the wicked.
This is a heavy one.
It is. This usage is primarily seen in the poetic books of the Old Testament.
Yeah, the specific verses noted in our scholarly sources are Job chapter 21, verse 18, Psalm 1, verse 4, Psalm 35, verse 5, and Hosea chapter 13, verse 3.
Those are some major texts.
They are. And these texts consistently utilize the simile to describe the reality of individuals who oppose divine law and live in rebellion against God.
The parallel used in the book of Job, chapter 21, verse 18, is terrifying when you stop and visualize it. The text pairs our word mut with tabim, the straw we discussed earlier.
Right, the stock material.
Yes. It describes both the chaff and the straw being driven violently before the wind, but the specific Hebrew word used for wind there is supa, which indicates a severe storm wind, a tempest, or a whirlwind.
It is not just a gentle evening breeze on the threshing floor. It is a violent meteorological event.
Right? It's destructive. If we put the imagery of Psalm 1 verse 4 next to Job 21, we see a stark picture. Psalm 1 famously says the wicked are like the chaff that the wind drives away.
A classic verse.
It is not just that the wicked are facing a punitive punishment. The truly terrifying nature of this metaphor is that they're being exposed as totally devoid of weight.
That is a crucial observation, and it demands that we analyze this through a historical theological framework. Within our tradition, we often discuss the concept of human depravity and the necessity of divine grace.
Right.
Psalm 1 beautifully illustrates this. It sets up a massive contrast. On one side, you have the righteous person. How are they described?
Like a tree planted by streams of water.
Yes. A tree is heavy. It has deep roots gripping the earth. It draws up water. It possesses life. It bears fruit. And it has permanence. It can withstand a storm because it has substance.
It's grounded.
Exactly. You mean the spot on. On the other side, you have the wicked. They are not compared to a diseased tree or a dying bush.
No, they aren't even plants anymore.
Right. They're compared to marrow. They are the chaff that the wind drives away. There is a complete spiritual weightlessness to the wicked.
Spiritual weightlessness. That's a striking phrase.
The theological implication is massive. Without divine grounding, without the imputed substance of truth and grace, human rebellion has no mass. It has no gravity to withstand the wind of divine justice.
Wow.
When the winnowing fork of God's judgment tosses humanity into the air, the wicked have nothing holding them down. They're simply scattered.
So it's about what you lack, not just what you've done.
Yes. It is not merely a judgment of torture. It is a judgment of erasure due to a complete lack of intrinsic value and spiritual reality. Sin, in this view, is a privation. It hollows a person out until there is nothing left but a dry husk.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This judgment of weightlessness applied to individuals scales up seamlessly in the prophetic literature.
It zooms way out.
Yeah, it moves from judging a single wicked person to judging massive geopolitical empires. The prophets aim this metaphor at hostile nations. We see this immense expansion of the concept primarily in the book of the prophet Isaiah.
Let's look closely at Isaiah chapter 17, verse 13.
Okay, pulling that up.
The text uses a very specific, striking phrase. It translates to chaff of the mountains, which in Hebrew is muharim. We have a very helpful commentary note here by the scholar John D.W. Watts on the book of Isaiah, chapters 1 through 33, specifically regarding how to interpret this verse.
The contrast of scale here is just staggering. Think about the geography of mountains and the terrifying reality of massive hostile armies in the ancient world.
Well, they were the superpowers of their day.
Right. From a human perspective, an invading army from the Assyrian or Babylonian Empire is utterly terrifying. It looks like a mountain. It is heavy, imposing, made of thousands of chariots, bronze shields, and iron spears.
It shook the ground when they marched.
Yeah, it seems entirely immovable. If you are a citizen of a small nation like Judah, watching that army approach is like watching a tidal wave of rock coming to crush you. How can the prophet Isaiah look out at an empire like that and compare it to lightweight, worthless husks?
It requires a radical shift in perspective. You have to look at the geopolitical landscape from a divine prophetic viewpoint.
Looking at it from above, base
Right.
sphere.
From a finite human viewpoint, yes, hostile nations are terrifying, immovable mountains of power. But when measured against absolute divine sovereignty, those same sprawling empires are instantly reduced to nothing.
Just husks.
Isaiah chapter 29, verse 5, provides a parallel piece of imagery where the hostile horde is equated with fine dust, utilizing the Hebrew phrase abakdak.
Fine dust.
Yes. The theological point is that the imposing mountain of human military might, when it finally faces the breath of divine judgment, is pulverized. It loses all its perceived mass.
It's like the tree in Psalm 1, but on a national scale.
You got it. Against the sovereignty of God, the greatest human empire has no more permanence or threat than the microscopic dust flying off a farmer's threshing floor. It is meant to provide deep psychological comfort to the people of God, assuring them that human power is an illusion when opposed to divine will.
But Isaiah does not stop there. He pushes the agricultural imagery even further. While he uses the concept of chaff to expose the weakness and emptiness of Israel's massive enemies, he also flips the metaphor entirely on its head to describe Judah's God-given strength.
This is a wild shift in the poetry.
It is. Let's look at how the prophet turns the metaphor around, where the nation of Judah actually becomes the thresher.
This role reversal is found in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 15. The text uses deliberate, intense hyperbole regarding the might that God will bestow upon Judah.
The specific imagery in this verse is frankly mind-blowing. God is speaking to Israel, and the verse says, "Behold, I make of you a threshing sledge, new, sharp, and having teeth. You shall thresh the mountains and crush them, and you shall make the hills like chaff."
The Hebrew phrase for making the hills like chaff is ji kamo tashim.
Notice the incredible role reversal happening here. Up until this point in the text, humans and nations were always the organic material being acted upon.
They were always the crop.
Yeah, there were the wheat or the husks being blown away by the wind. Now, Judah is no longer the wheat waiting to be threshed. Judah is the heavy, brutal threshing sledge itself.
Let's break down the why behind this highly hyperbolic promise. Historically speaking, the nation of Judah was a small, weak, frequently conquered strip of land.
They were tiny compared to Assyria.
Oh, minuscule. They were caught geographically between massive superpowers. They were constantly the ones being crushed, ground down, and subjugated by larger empires.
They were used to being the chaff.
Right. But this verse acts as a massive theological statement about divine empowerment and justification. God is declaring that he will take the smallest, seemingly weakest nation, and he will grant them the immense weight, force, and authority to reduce imposing geographical and political obstacles into empty husks.
It's giving them weight.
Yes. It is a divine promise that God's favor provides an unnatural weight. He takes a weak, insignificant people and turns them into an instrument of his sovereignty, capable of turning the terrifying mountains of their enemies into met. It is a total reversal of earthly expectations.
That's incredible. After covering the judgment of individuals, the collapse of empires, and the empowerment of weak nations in earthly conflicts, the biblical text provides one final, highly abstract use of the word mut.
A completely different angle.
Yeah. In this instance, it relates not to people or to geographical places, but to the very fabric of existence itself, time. Let's examine the ephemerality of time.
This final, unique usage is found in the book of Zephaniah, chapter 2, verse 2.
Wait, isn't that the verse we talked about earlier with the spelling?
Good memory, yes. As we noted earlier in our grammatical discussion, this is the only verse in the entire Hebrew Bible where the word mut is spelled in the plain form, with the vowel letter included.
The one with the vaf.
Right. The conceptual focus here shifts to the reality of passing time. The Hebrew word yom, meaning day, is explicitly described as passing away like chaff. We reference the meticulous commentary note by Hubert Ursicler on the book of Zephaniah for this specific textual interpretation.
This brings the topic directly down to your own daily modern experience. We so often think of time as a heavy, imposing burden.
We really do.
We constantly talk about the long, difficult slog of a work week. We feel the heavy weight of the years pressing down on us as we age. Time feels slow, dense, and heavy. But the prophet Zephaniah looks at human time and compares a passing day to a lightweight, wind-blown husk.
This raises an important question regarding how we view the reality of our own days. The prophetic text presents a stark theological reality. Human time is incredibly brief.
It goes so fast.
It does. We measure our days carefully, we schedule our hours, we plan our years, and we assign them great weight. But from an eternal divine perspective, they vanish instantly. The wind of eternity blows constantly, and our individual days scatter like husks before it.
So what's the takeaway from that?
The metaphor urges a radical shift in human priorities. It demands a focus on matters of eternal substance, on knowing God and His truth, rather than investing our ultimate trust and identity in days and earthly pursuits that will inevitably blow away without a trace. It echoes the prayer of Psalm 90 to teach us to number our days, recognizing their weightless, fleeting nature.
So let's bring all these lexicographical, agricultural, and heavy theological threads together.
Let's tie it up.
We started with a simple, dirty agricultural byproduct on an ancient threshing floor. The worthless, empty husk of a seed that provides no nourishment.
Just peanut skin, basically.
Right. We saw how the strict Hebrew grammar locked this word into an unyielding rule. It is always used as a simile, and it is always violently driven by the wind. And from that simple earthly starting point, it blossomed into a sweeping, massive metaphor.
Covering basically everything.
Yeah. The prophets used it to describe the terrifying spiritual emptiness and weightlessness of the wicked, the sudden dust-like collapse of massive hostile empires, the divinely empowered strength of a small, weak tribe, and finally, the fleeting, uncontrollable nature of time itself. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is truly amazing how digging into the root structure of a single ancient Hebrew word offers an entirely new lens for reading ancient poetry and understanding our own reality.
If the relentless wind of time and the perfect standard of divine justice inevitably blows away everything that is Mekamate, everything that lacks true substance, eternal weight, and spiritual value, what is the solid grace-given seed in your own life that will remain resting on the threshing floor?